Imagine building the house, paying the bills, funding the dreams, and still being told you rebad with money. That's exactly what happened to the woman in today's story. After years of supporting her husband emotionally and financially, she discovers he has been secretly tracking her income while wasting thousands on fake financial freedom schemes. But instead of breaking her, that discovery becomes the beginning of her comeback. This is more than drama, it is a story about reclaiming power, identity, and self-worth.
That's it, I'm taking over our finances. Ethan's words cut through the air the moment I landed a huge hotel design deal. He said I was reckless with money. In front of my own assistant, I was so humiliated, I just nodded. That night, I was looking for a recipe on his phone when a calendar alert appeared. Consultation at a high-end jeweler with some woman named Sophie. The blood in my veins turned to ice. This secret life he was funding destroyed everything I thought we were building. "I'm handling the money," he had said, standing in our half-done living room. My dream project. My hands holding the blueprints didn't even shake. They couldn't show the shockwave that tore through me as I thought about the last 5 years. How I'd made my own success smaller to protect his delicate ego, not seeing I was slowly erasing myself. Before we continue, thanks for being here, where we share these critical stories. If you think all work in a relationship should be valued, please subscribe. It's free and it helps our community grow. Now, back to my disaster. He stood there in a designer tracksuit, the kind that says, "I'm a visionary," but is actually paid for by me. He was just staring, spoiling for a fight. I could tell he had a speech ready, one he'd probably practiced to make himself feel smart. I wasn't even sure what disaster he thought he was saving us from. "I manage it all from now on," he declared, his voice full of confidence because I was quiet. "Your salary goes into an account I control. You get a weekly allowance. It's for our future, our future." The phrase tasted like acid. I calmly rolled up my design sketches and looked him in the eye. "Okay, Ethan, if that's what you think is best." He just stared at me. This was not in his script. He wanted a fight, wanted me to defend my business, to list all my achievements. He needed an argument so he could call me emotional and justify this hostile takeover of my entire life. Seriously? He actually flinched, completely thrown off balance. "Just like that?" "Just like that," I said, my voice strangely calm. "We can get it sorted this week. You can have total control." The relief on his face was so sudden and raw it was almost funny. "Good, great, it's the right move." He started to walk away, but had to get one last shot in. Maybe now we can finally build a real legacy. And then he left for some networking event, another hobby I was apparently paying for. I stood there smelling fresh paint and dust and something else burning our marriage, with the fire finally hitting the roof. My reckless spending. I glanced around the room I had designed and was funding all on my own. The vintage Italian sofa I'd won at auction, the custom light fixtures I got a professional discount on, the art from a local Austin painter I supported after Ethan said we couldn't afford it just before he dropped $3,000 on a branding seminar that went nowhere. This room, this entire house, our whole life. I had designed it, paid for it, and managed it, while Ethan posted cliché quotes about his journey to his tiny group of followers. I picked up his phone, my exhausted face staring back from the black screen. When did I start to feel like a visitor in my own house? When did these dark circles under my eyes move in for good? Then I remembered the calendar. I opened it, and everything came pouring out. It wasn't just a schedule. It was a secret ledger. Entry after entry, with detailed notes, explained the last 5 years of our marriage. Mortgage payments, from Maya's commission. Flights for our vacation, from Maya's bonus. The entire renovation budget, from Maya's savings. That boy's trip to Vegas he claimed a client covered. $8,000 on my credit card. His so-called brand expenses were a joke. Website hosting, podcast gear, a $4,000 camera he never used. A whole new wardrobe to keep up his image. His supposed investments in one failed online venture after another were shocking. All of it secretly funded by the profits from my design company. I started a new spreadsheet, my fingers flying across the keys. It was cold, clean and brutal. Date, expense, amount, and source. Year 1 loaded. My contribution to our life, $90,000. Ethan's, nothing. Year 2, I brought in $120,000. He spent $5,000. Years 3, 4, and 5 were the exact same awful story. My income surged after I started my own company. His financial contributions were imaginary, but his spending was very, very real, all of it covered by me. The final number made my stomach turn. My total contribution, more than $600,000. Ethan's, a net loss of over $15,000. I had bankrolled more than 100% of our life for 5 years, while he dared to call me careless with money. While he built his influencer fantasy on my hard work. I wasn't his partner. I was his only investor. I was his safety net, his sponsor, his personal line of credit, and his sole source of income, all wrapped up in one very tired woman, and he had the audacity to put me on an allowance. I named the spreadsheet Ethan's Brand Investment and saved it everywhere on the cloud, a hard drive, and a tiny memory stick I tucked away. I sat back, the damning numbers glowing in the dark room. This was proof. This was leverage I never wanted, but now I absolutely needed. My job taught me one thing: a strong foundation will always outlast a pretty but hollow facade. He could spin whatever story he wanted about his brilliant ideas and my so-called bad habits. But numbers don't have feelings. Numbers don't lie to protect a fragile ego. I thought about making the cover of a huge design magazine last month. A major feature story on my newest hotel project. It brought in a flood of new, high-paying work. I had come home ecstatic, bursting with the news, ready to book a trip to Italy to celebrate. Maybe we could finally get that dream house in the hill country. But he just looked up from his phone and muttered, "Cool, that should help with the brand's cash flow. Not congratulations, I am so incredibly proud of you. Not that's amazing, sweetheart. Just a cold, empty calculation of how my achievement could fuel his personal fantasy." I tried to tell him about the famous clients I'd be designing for, the creative possibilities ahead. He just grunted, his attention already drifting back to his social media feed. He dismissed a huge career milestone, like someone who only sees their partner as a resource, not as a person. And I still made his favourite dinner that night. I even made the pasta by hand. I opened the expensive bottle of wine we were saving, trying so hard to create a celebration out of thin air. He ate his dinner while scrolling on his phone, muttering about brand authenticity and growing his audience. As I watched him, something inside me just shattered. It wasn't a crack, it was a clean break. The life we had created together wasn't just damaged, it was a complete lie. I told myself that funding his dreams was just being supportive, but it was actually the slow-motion demolition of my own self-respect. My sister Chloe asked me last week if Ethan was my husband or my neediest client. Her question felt like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" I'd asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Well, you're always bankrolling his next big project," she said. "You edit his blog. You talk him down from the ledge every time a deal falls through. My friends who own actual businesses get less help from their partners," she pointed out. I brushed it off, saying that creative people just need more support. But her words stuck with me. When did I become his unpaid business manager instead of his wife? When did nursing his delicate ego become my second job? When did I stop being his partner and turn into the silent investor he completely took for granted? The answers were all right there on that glowing screen. 5 years of my net worth, growing while his secret debts piled up. A slow, quiet erosion of my self-worth until I forgot I was supposed to have any. I slammed the laptop shut. The living room felt haunted by the celebration I'd imagined before Ethan's little power play. We were supposed to host dinner for a big potential client tomorrow night. Another event I would have to plan. Another meal I would pay for, cook, and then clean up by myself. Another show of being the perfect Austin power couple, where I did all the work and Ethan just showed up to talk. I took out my phone and opened our group chat. Hey guys, so sorry, but I have to cancel the lake house trip this weekend. Something urgent came up. The replies came back fast, no worries, and hope everything is okay. Then I sent a text to Ethan, who was probably charming some stranger at a trendy Austin bar with my money. The lake trip is off. We need to set up those separate bank accounts you wanted. I'm available Saturday to do it. His reply came instantly. Awesome, let's do it. I smiled at the screen. He had absolutely no idea what was really coming. Separate meant I was done being his personal venture capitalist. No more designer clothes, fancy meals, or paying for his absurd influencer delusion. He didn't understand what splitting everything down the middle would actually mean. He was about to be on the hook for half the mortgage of our downtown Austin loft, a place he could never afford by himself. Half the utility bills he always ignored, half the groceries he never once bought. He had no idea that his perfect life, a life he credited to his own creative vision, was about to completely fall apart, because I was done being his silent backer, his personal ATM, done funding his ego while he shot down my professional wins with a smug little smile. Ethan wanted separate finances. Well, he was about to get his wish and discover the true cost of my support. The notification lit up my screen, a perfect little chart from my financial app. I just sat there in the dark, watching 7 years of our marriage get boiled down to a few brutal, colourful bars. Every single year told the same story. My salary as a software engineer just kept climbing. Alex's income was a tiny flat line at the bottom, maybe $1,000 a month from odd jobs, before he bought more supplies. I created a new folder on my laptop. I called it the Fungi Kingdom. That was for his gourmet mushroom farm, the grand venture he'd been running in our basement for 3 years while I paid for our life. The total amount I had sunk into it was $72,000 for industrial humidifiers, sterile spore kits, climate control systems, custom shelving, and trips to mycology conventions in Oregon. And the total it had earned in return was $5,200. I just stared at the screen. $5,200 in 3 years. That is less than $150 a month. It barely paid for the specialized HEPA filter he swore was a critical business asset. The numbers made me sick. For every $1 his mushroom farm made, I had invested almost $14 just to keep it going. This was not a business. It was a money-burning hobby that I was financing. I opened another document, unpaid contributions. This one really hurt. It was all the background labor I did automatically, the chores I didn't even see as work anymore. Meal planning and grocery shopping 8 hours a week. Cooking, another 10. Cleaning, 6 hours. Laundry, 3. Managing all our bills, appointments, and home maintenance at least 4 more hours. That comes to a grand total of 31 hours a week. At $60 an hour, far less than a personal assistant, that's $1,860 a week. That's almost $100,000 a year in labour I was never paid for. When you add that to his business losses, my annual contribution was well over $200,000. Alex S. was maybe $15,000, if he got lucky. Just then my phone buzzed, a text from Alex out with his buddies. "Late one tonight, don't wait up." I sighed and did the quick calculation. He and his friends loved those rooftop bars in High where a single craft cocktail is $22. He'd have 4, at least, plus some expensive appetizers. $150 just gone. All on the joint credit card I was about to freeze permanently. Soon the money would be separate, and Alex's nights out would be his problem to solve. I saved the file, shut the laptop, and the living room went black. Outside, the sounds of a cool Sunday evening in Denver drifted in the distant rumble of the light rail, a faint siren. But inside it was dead silent, and I felt something new. Not happiness, not yet. It was clarity. A cold, sharp understanding of the man I had married versus the illusion I had been funding. Monday morning arrived with the thin, crisp air of a Denver sunrise, making the sky feel vast and clear. I was up at 5:30 a.m., like always. But this morning I made coffee just for one. I used the expensive burr grinder I'd bought myself for Christmas. Alex had claimed it almost immediately, saying it had the perfect grind consistency for his pour-over, which really just meant, this is mine now. I just stopped fighting those tiny battles a long time ago. It was just easier to let him have his way, to keep things peaceful. But the peace was a lie. I just kept making myself smaller, piece by piece, until I had almost vanished. No more. I made my coffee with purpose. I used the AeroPress he always said was too complicated. I even frothed my own milk. Each step was a quiet declaration. I also made a proper breakfast for myself, a spinach and feta omelette with a side of avocado toast. At 7:15, Alex stumbled out of our bedroom, looking precisely as I'd imagined. Groggy, entitled, and expecting his morning routine to be laid out and waiting for him. He stopped dead in the doorway. The espresso machine was off. There was no breakfast for him on the kitchen island. There was only me, sitting at the dining table with my laptop, finishing my breakfast. "Is there any coffee?" he asked. Not angry, just baffled, like a child who woke up and the world wasn't designed for his comfort anymore. I didn't look up from my screen. "The beans are in the pantry. You know how the machine works." An uncomfortable silence filled the space. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, trying to make sense of this. "You didn't make me any?" I finally met his eyes. "Separate finances, Alex. It's what you wanted. Time to be your own man, remember?" His jaw clenched. I could see him trying to find a comeback, some angle that didn't make him sound like a total parasite. He had nothing. He just grabbed a protein bar from the box I bought and walked out. I heard the front door slam, and then there was silence. A completely different kind of silence. It wasn't just clear. It was light. It felt like hope. For 7 years, I was his producer, making sure the curtain rose on his perfect morning every single day. And the producer had just walked off the job. On my lunch break, I made one last spreadsheet, shared living costs. This was the new reality. I laid it all out. Mortgage, $5,200 a month. His share, $2,600. Property taxes, $500 a month. His share, $250. Homeowners insurance, $160 a month. His share, $80. Utilities averaged around $500 a month. His half, $250. Internet, $90 a month. His half, $45. HOA fees, $400 a month. His half, $200. The monthly baseline to simply exist in our condo was $3,425. That didn't include food, car payments, or any of his other personal expenses. This was just the cost of having a roof over his head. A cost I had been carrying while he tossed in some cash here and there and called us a team. I created automated payment requests through our bank, a clean system where every bill would ping his account for his half. No emotion, just the math. The first request went out that Wednesday for the quarterly HOA fee of $1,200. I sent the $600 request with a simple memo. "Your half of the HOA fees." His text came back instantly. $600? What's this for? He honestly had no idea what our life cost. He had never once opened a statement. I texted back. "It's half the homeowners association dues. This is how separate finances work. It's due by Friday." The 3 little dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, one word hit my phone. "Fine." The money appeared in my account on Thursday. I could feel his anger through the notification. No note, just the exact amount transferred with silent fury. Perfect. Let him be angry. Let him feel a fraction of what I felt every time I paid for his next brilliant hobby expense, while he told me we needed to switch to store-brand coffee to save a few bucks. 2 weeks into our new system, my phone buzzed. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen, and my stomach twisted into a hard knot. Years of quiet criticism from the woman who raised a man who saw my income as his personal grant money. Claire, darling. Her voice was like smooth velvet with tiny barbs in it, the tone she used to get whatever she wanted. "I'm coming for dinner on Sunday. Alex mentioned you were making that divine beef Wellington again." Divine? I'd made it twice. Both times for her. Both times because Alex had volunteered me for a full day of cooking without even telling me. I almost laughed out loud. That's not going to work, Eleanor. I won't be cooking dinner on Sunday. The silence on the other end was electric, filled with the sound of an entire world being turned upside down. I beg your pardon? Her voice went from sweet to pure ice, confused, insulted. Alex and I are managing our own expenses now, I said. My voice steady, the same one I used with difficult clients at my firm. A big meal like that just isn't in my personal budget at the moment. You're welcome to visit, of course, but you'll need to figure out dinner. The line was completely silent. I could feel her struggling to process this new version of me, the one who wasn't her private chef. But Claire, Sunday dinner is our thing. It's tradition. A tradition where I cook for 8 hours, and she praises Alex for being so charming. A tradition where he criticizes the cost of the ingredients that I paid for. Alex can cook, I said, my voice flat, or you can get takeout. It's your choice. I hung up before she could reply. It was polite, it was final, and it was non-negotiable. I immediately opened my calendar and blocked off the entire day on Sunday. I titled the event, The Great Unraveling. Just 4 days. 4 days until Eleanor showed up expecting a gourmet meal and got a reality check instead. 4 days until the whole fantasy came crumbling down. The week dragged on with that strange, quiet tension that comes right before a big storm. Every innocent question from Alex felt like a trap. Every simple salad I made for myself felt like a tiny act of defiance. Every bill that arrived was just more kindling for the fire. When I walked in on Wednesday, the kitchen was an absolute disaster zone, and not Alex's usual mess of leaving cabinets open. This was pure chaos. Pans were piled everywhere, a grease smoke hung in the air, and I could definitely smell something burning. Alex was hunched over his tablet, watching a video called Easiest Beef Wellington Ever. I set my laptop bag down and just watched him. He was so focused, he didn't hear me come in. It was that same intense look he got when he was trying to day trade crypto, always chasing the big, easy score. What is all this? I asked. He jumped, nearly knocking over a bottle of Cabernet. My good Cabernet, of course, not the cheap stuff we cook with. It's a dry run, he snapped, his voice instantly defensive. For the nursery reveal, I scanned the garage. Sawdust coated every surface. A piece of expensive walnut was split right down the middle. A thin curl of smoke was rising from a power tool on the bench. Need a hand? I asked, mostly just to watch him squirm. He clenched his jaw. I've got this. I just shrugged and went back inside. I got a glass of water and just listened to him lose a battle with a set of blueprints that were way out of his league. 10 minutes later, I heard him curse. Then the high-pitched shriek of a saw binding up. I went back out to find him desperately yanking at the tool as the motor whined and filled the air with the smell of burning wood. He burned out the motor. He tried to force the cut instead of letting the blade do the work. The whole garage now smelled like an electrical fire, a scent that would cling to everything for days. You have to guide the saw, not shove it, I said, over the piercing whine. It's not a bulldozer. He completely ignored me, just wrestled with the thing until it finally died with a pathetic little pop. I turned around and went upstairs for a shower. I heard the ruined tool hit the concrete floor, followed by another perfectly chosen swear word. An hour later, the garage was a certified disaster zone. Every tool I owned was out. A fine dust of wood particles covered everything. Something sticky was now permanently bonded to the floor. The siding was overflowing with packaging from specialty wood shops and designer hardware stores. I saw cracked joints, a botched varnish job, and the piece of walnut that was somehow both splintered and scorched. Ethan stood in the middle of the wreckage, looking completely and utterly defeated. "Why is this so impossible?" he muttered, talking more to himself than to me. "How do you make this stuff look so easy?" I could have told him it takes patience. It's about respecting the materials. You can't just fast talk your way through it like one of your startup pitches. But I kept my mouth shut. I just looked at the expensive mess he'd made, trying to fake something I do for a living. He pulled out his phone and started tapping. A few minutes later, I heard him. Yes, an overnight delivery for tomorrow. The heirloom crib in natural walnut, please. Yes, that's the one. No, the address is correct. My mind was already doing the calculations. The heirloom crib from Nouveau Bébé was $3,000, plus rush shipping, taxes, and the white glove setup fee. Well over $4,000, easily. Money I knew for a fact Ethan did not have. It would go on the joint credit card he was supposed to be paying after his last revolutionary app idea crashed and burned. He hung up the phone and saw me standing there. Mom wanted to see the nursery finished, he said, as if that justified everything. I know, I replied. I already had a beautiful, affordable one picked out. His face just crumpled. For just a second, he saw it another invisible thing I always took care of. Another huge expense I would have just quietly handled. Another part of his mother's life I was expected to manage so he could play the part of the successful, doting son. On Saturday night, I was curled up on the sofa with a stack of design magazines. I actually had a free evening since I wasn't busy proofreading his business plans or managing his social calendar. He was in the nursery. I could hear him moving around in there. Drawers opening and closing, the rustle of plastic packaging, the low hum of the new air purifier. Around 9:30, he walked into the living room. "The delivery is confirmed for 1 o'clock, he announced proudly. "Evelyn gets here at 1, so the timing is absolutely perfect." I just nodded, not even looking up from my sketchbook. "I'm going to go ahead and get everything set up in there now. Get the mobile assembled." I just said, "Sure." He stood there for a second, so obviously expecting me to praise him for all his amazing effort. I offered him absolutely nothing. I just kept sketching a new lighting concept. He went back down the hall to the nursery. I heard the closet doors opening, the soft crinkle of the expensive organic sheets he bought. He came back out 10 minutes later. "Where did you put those little baby shoes?" I told him. Cedar chest, left side. I heard him fussing around again, playing the role of the perfect father-to-be for his mother's big visit. I turned a page, a small knowing smile on my face. Sunday morning was clear and bright. I slept until 9, a rare luxury, and brewed myself a tea, ignoring his new espresso machine. I pulled on my oldest, most paint-splattered jeans. It felt like the perfect day to finally repaint the old patio chairs. By 11, I was outside surrounded by drop cloths and paint cans when Sarah from next door appeared at the fence. "Morning, Mia," she called, holding a coffee mug. "Looks like a serious project." I sort of gestured vaguely back toward the house. Through the big glass doors, I could see Ethan fussing with the lighting in the nursery, which was already perfect. "Ethan's mother is visiting," I told her, scraping at a stubborn fleck of paint. Sarah leaned on the fence. "Is everything all right over there?" She hesitated. "Mark said he thought he heard Mark is her husband, a therapist whose home office has a perfect view of our backyard." "What did Mark hear?" I asked, my voice totally neutral. "He said it sounded like you two were having some pretty intense conversations last week." "Not fighting," he said, but strained. "We just wanted to make sure you were okay." I could have just laughed and brushed it off, smiled and said it was nothing, just the usual stress before the baby arrives. But I looked right at Sarah. She's a good friend, she reads people, and she knows when something is off. "We're in the middle of a corporate restructuring," I told her. "A hostile takeover, you could call it." Her eyes went wide. "That sounds serious." I wiped my dusty hands on my jeans. "It's really not that complicated. We're just finally being honest about who really holds the controlling interest here." Sarah just nodded, her face as a mask of total understanding. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, reading between the lines of my corporate metaphor. "New terms and conditions," she repeated. "You mean financially?" "I mean, we're living in reality now," I said. "A reality that is very different from the story Ethan tells his investors." Sarah's expression softened with empathy, and then with a hint of solidarity. "Okay," she said softly. "If you ever need to talk, or just want a glass of wine, I'm right here." She gave my arm a little squeeze, and then headed back to her house. I tried to focus on my painting, but the herbs were just a colourful blur. I'd just planted a seed with my neighbour Sarah. I had a witness. Someone to see the perfect image crack just before it completely shattered. At 12:45, I went inside to get cleaned up. The nursery did look beautiful. I had to give Ethan that. Our finest china was laid out. The expensive crib stood in the center of the room. The organic linens were folded perfectly. The lighting was soft. The massive shipping box from Nouveau Bébé was propped up in the corner. Ethan walked out of the bedroom in a new cashmere sweater, ready to perform for his mother. The perfect husband, even though our marriage was completely insolvent. "She's 5 minutes out," he said. I glanced down at my own outfit, paint-stained jeans and an old t-shirt, my hair a total mess. "I know," I said, walking towards the stairs. When I came down again in a simple silk top and jeans, Evelyn's silver Mercedes was pulling into our driveway. Ethan puffed up his chest, preparing for his performance. I watched him from the living room with a strange, clinical detachment. No nervousness, no impulse to help him sell his lie. I just wanted to see what would happen when his mother finally met the man he truly was. The doorbell rang at exactly 1 o'clock. Evelyn was never a minute late. Ethan pulled the door open. "Mother, you're right on time." She swept past him in a cloud of expensive perfume, her sharp gaze landing on me immediately. Mia. Her voice could drop the temperature in a room by 10 degrees. I'd have put up with that voice for 8 long years. 8 years of little digs about my career, my cooking, my entire life. 8 years of failing to measure up for the man who was draining my business account. "Evelyn, it's so good to see you," I said, my own voice smooth as glass. She clicked across the hardwood floor toward the nursery and then stopped cold. The room was perfect. The designer furniture was arranged perfectly. It was the very picture of wifely perfection, except for the huge branded shipping box from Nouveau Bébé sitting right there in plain sight. Evelyn S.'s face went through a whole cycle of emotions. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally pure disapproval. "What is all of this?" Her voice was like a whip crack. "Ethan, I thought you were making the crib yourself." My husband immediately went into damage control. "We wanted to treat you, Mom. I ordered from Nouveau Bébé." "You love their designs, Ice." "You ordered?" She looked at him like he'd confessed to a crime. "Why didn't Mia design one?" Her eyes snapped back to me, waiting, demanding an answer. This was it, the moment I had been planning for weeks. I strolled into the room, swirling a glass of sparkling water, completely at ease. "Because, Evelyn, custom design work is no longer a free service in this house." "A free service?" she asked, as if the concept was alien. "Ethan wanted separate finances," I explained, keeping it light. "So now we split everything, household projects too." The nursery was his turn, and he handled it, by ordering a $4,000 crib. I let that number sink in. I could practically see the gears off turning her financial advisor's mind. "Ethan," she said, turning on him. "You spent $4,000 on a crib?" He fidgeted. "It's fine, Mom, it's not a big deal." "The lie was pathetic, isn't it?" I asked softly. "Because the HOA payment bounced, Leo. That's $700. And the car lease is past due another $600. Plus the $1,000 for the Amex you swore you'd pay. That's $2,300. Leo's face went pale. His mother, Diane, just stared, her eyes like chips of ice. It wasn't shock, it was evaluation. "Leo Vance," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "What is your wife talking about?" He just stood there, mouth open, completely trapped. The question echoed in the tense quiet. "What is she talking about?" I watched him search for a lie, any lie. He couldn't argue with the late notices in his mother's hand. Arguing would just make him look weak. He tried to sound calm. "Mom, it's not what it looks like. Clara's just stressed from the bed rest." "I'm not stressed, Leo," I interrupted from the couch, my voice steady. "Your half of the monthly budget is $4,200. Condo, car, insurance, food. It's all laid out in the spreadsheet we share." Diane's entire posture changed. Decades of sizing up bad investments took over. Her face was pure business. When she spoke, her voice was the sharp, no-nonsense tone of a developer about to kill a deal. "Clara," she said, focusing completely on me, "and what exactly is your portion of these bills?" It was the question I knew was coming. I sipped my water and looked right at her. The same as Leo's, I answered. We agreed to split everything down the middle. It was his suggestion. Diane's eyes narrowed slightly. So what is your total monthly outlay? I could have lied, made it seem less lopsided. But I was done protecting him. $4,200 for my half of the bills, plus my student, loans and personal expenses. It comes out to around $5,000 a month. I let the number hang in the air. I could see her brain crunching the figures, looking for the error she knew had to exist. And before you started this 50-50 split, she asked. That was it? The question that would detonate everything. Before that, I was covering about $9,000 a month of our expenses. Leo S. average input was maybe $700. The air in the condo went still. Diane stood frozen, her expression a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and a deep, cutting sense of betrayal. That's impossible, she whispered, her voice strained. But she was a woman who built a career on cold, hard math. She knew I wouldn't lie about numbers. Oh, it's possible, I said. And all the bank records are in the office if you want to check. Yes, Diane replied, her voice dangerously sharp. I do. Leo made a choked sound. Mom! This isn't necessary. It's our personal business. Leo, Diane's voice sliced through his protest. Shut up! I pointed to the small office off the living room. The filing cabinet, top drawer. She walked in, pulled out a thick accordion file and dumped it on the coffee table. A cascade of paper. 5 years of statements, receipts, tax forms. Every single transaction, perfectly organised. Every transaction was highlighted. Diane sorted through the statements like a prosecutor examining evidence, which, I suppose, she was. There was no summary page, but she didn't need one. The pattern was obvious. For 5 straight years, my pharmacy salary covered almost everything. His deposits were sporadic and small. She started pulling out individual credit card bills, her hand shaking just slightly. His new drone, $2,000. The networking trip to Los Angeles, $3,000. The monthly lease on his camera gear, $800 every single month. The expenses for his photography business were astonishing. Website hosting, print portfolios, entry fees for competitions he never won. All of it went on our joint card, the one I paid off, while he told me we needed to cut back on groceries. Dear God, Diane whispered, looking at a bill. Leo edged closer. Mom, it's an investment. You have to project success to be successful. And what was the return on this investment? Diane asked, not looking up. Total silence. Leo, what was your gross income from photography last year? Nothing. About $7,000, I said quietly from the couch. Before expenses, Diane's head shot up. She looked at her son as if she'd never seen him before. The humiliation was radiating off him. You spent, she shuffled through a few statements, adding it up in her head, over $50,000 to earn $7,000. It takes money to make money, Leo insisted, his voice cracking. It's about building a portfolio. Did you know, Diane interrupted, her voice dangerously low, that Clara was paying for 90% of your life while you built a portfolio that lost $43,000? Leo's face turned a blotchy, angry red. She has a stable job. It's not the same. Then why? Diane said, each word a hammer blow. Did you tell me on Sunday that she was careless with money? Why did you push for this 50-50 split if you weren't even covering your half? He sputtered, looking for words. Mom, she's making it sound worse than it is. Am I? I asked, my voice even. Which part, Leo? Which of these overdue notices is wrong? Which camera lease isn't real? He had nothing. Diane swept the papers into a messy pile with a disgusted sigh. She looked over at me on the couch, and for the first time, I didn't see a critical mother-in-law. I saw respect. Clara, she said, her tone much softer, where do you work? The question was so unexpected, all I could do was point. Seattle General. I'm a pharmacist. She nodded, a new understanding dawning. She left Leo standing there amidst the financial ruin. Diane was quiet for a long moment, just processing. She looked at the expensive camera gear piled in the corner, then back at me, propped up on pillows. She understood the difference between a job and a hobby. She knew what real work looked like. "He photographs buildings," she said, her voice full of a new, bitter irony. "But he doesn't understand the foundation of anything." She looked at me, her expression grim but clear. "He spent 5 years building a portfolio. You spent 5 years building a life, a career, a family." She finally met my eyes. "My son plays with images. You deal in reality." Her side of the refrigerator was organized. Yogurt, fresh fruit, salads in containers. And Leo's side? A half-empty carton of almond milk, 4 cans of Red Bull, and a container with 1 dried-out burrito. Nothing real. Nothing to sustain a person. He lived like a bachelor, not an expectant father. Diane stared at the glaring difference between their lives. She shut the door and moved to the pantry. She opened it, and it was the same story, a clear dividing line. My side was stocked. Rice, beans, canned goods, prenatal vitamins, everything needed to run a household and prepare for a baby. And on Leo's shelves? 5 giant containers of boutique protein powder. That's it. Different flavors, sleek packaging, but not one real food item. It was the perfect metaphor for his contribution to our life. Diane stood motionless, staring at the shelves as if they confirmed a deep fear. Then she went to the sink and pulled out the trash bin. It was overflowing. I hadn't been able to take it out myself. The garbage told the whole tale. Soggy take-out boxes, burnt toast, a carton of mouldy strawberries, and a bag of wilted spinach. He couldn't even manage the basics. It was all proof of his helplessness. Proof of a man who never grew up because his wife handled everything. Diane's face went pale, then flushed a dangerous shade of red. She set her jaw, turned to face Leo, and her voice, when it came out, was low and guttural. "You can't even feed yourselves." It wasn't a scream. It was an indictment, a verdict delivered with the finality of a wrecking ball. It was the sound of a mother realizing her son was a liability, the kind of dead weight she'd cut from a project, without a second thought. Outside, from the living room window, I could see our neighbours on their balconies. Mr. and Mrs. Kim staring over. Diane was trembling with rage, one hand clutching the bank statements. 5 years, she whispered, her voice cracking. 5 whole years. Leo took a hesitant step toward her. "Mom, don't," she hissed, holding up a hand. "Don't you dare." Her voice shook. All her professional composure was gone, burned away by mother's fury. "For 5 years, you let her carry you. For 5 years, you used her salary to pretend you were an artist while she worked overtime at a hospital. For 5 years, you had the nerve to tell me she was the problem, when she was the only reason you still have this condo." Leo's face was ashen. "It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple," Diane shot back. "The numbers don't lie, Leo. The late notices don't lie. And this," she swept her arm at the empty pantry, the take-out bags, the disgusting trash. "This doesn't lie either. Through our condo window, I could see people on the sidewalks below looking up. The fight must have been louder than I realized." Diane's voice had carried. Now they were standing there, some with their phones out, the screens like little fires in the evening light. I could only imagine what the building's residents were texting. Diane turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "Clara," she whispered, "I am so deeply sorry." Her apology was sincere, but I knew the hurricane was just making landfall. She looked right at me, her face a mask of pain. "I didn't know," she repeated, her voice shaking. "I just wasn't paying attention." "You couldn't have known," I replied, struggling to keep my own voice level. "He is a master at creating a reality that doesn't exist." But Isabel just shook her head, staring at the financial report like it was a death warrant. "Was he actually hiding it?" she asked, her voice getting firmer. "Or did we both just decide not to look?" Her question hit me like a punch to the gut. She was right. Leo hadn't hidden anything. I was funding his entire life, paying for his so-called writing career from my own business account, and running our home for everyone to see. Isabel witnessed it all. The huge dinner parties I organised, the immaculate apartment I kept, the pricey gadgets I bought that Leo would show off as if they were from both of us. She saw the whole show and stayed silent because the truth was too uncomfortable. A wife bankrolling her husband just didn't fit into her worldview. To ask would mean admitting her son wasn't the man she'd raised him to be. "I saw you," Isabel continued, her voice finally cracking. "I saw you do everything, the cooking, the cleaning, the endless work. I saw Leo do nothing, and I convinced myself you were a superwoman, that you enjoyed being in control, that you were happy." She covered her face as the first sob broke free. "But you weren't happy, were you? You were drained. You were being taken for a ride. And I let it happen, praising you for being so capable instead of calling him out for being a parasite." Outside, our neighbours were still there. A small crowd had formed on the lawn and sidewalk, their phones still pointed at our apartment. I saw Jenna Miller creeping closer to the kitchen window. Her expression wasn't judging, it was a look of shocking recognition, of a secret she shared. How many others saw what Isabel saw? How many knew our marriage was just an act but chose to look away? Isabel pulled herself together, wiping at her eyes. When she met my gaze again, her entire presence had changed. "Nina," she said, her voice now sharp with the authority of a slay CP, "what do you need me to do?" The question floored me. I had prepared for every possible outcome today, but getting an offer of help from the one person I was sure would defend her son to the very end was not on my list. I glanced outside at our audience watching this family crisis play out. "I need you to admit this is real, and to say it out loud," I said, my own voice finding its power. "That's all. Just be a witness to the truth." Isabel gave one quick, decisive nod. Then she faced Leas with a stare that could freeze lava. "I am booking a room at the Ritz-Carlton tonight," she stated, her tone like absolute ice. "When I return, if I return, you better be ready for a very different kind of conversation about this marriage and what you bring to it." She clutched the tablet under her arm like a weapon and strode to the door. Leo finally spoke. "Mom, wait!" No, she didn't even look back. "You have brought shame on yourself, Leo, in front of your wife, in front of our neighbours, and in front of me. I suggest you sit with that feeling for a very long time. You need to understand the gravity of what you have done." She yanked the door open and marched onto our front lawn, straight into the gathering of at least 15 people. The quiet was deafening. Isabel walked right through the crowd as if she owned the entire block, head held high, shoulders squared, the damning tablet on full display. Our neighbours actually moved aside for her. I think I saw Jenna reach out and quickly touch Isabel's arm as she went by a silent sign of support. I couldn't be sure. Isabel slipped into her dark grey Audi and drove away without looking back. For a second, no one moved. The neighbours just stood there, stunned, trying to process what they had just seen. Then, one by one, they started to leave, but I saw their faces. Jenna gave me a look that was pure respect. Mrs. Chen from next door looked deep in thought, like she was rethinking a moment from her own life. Even Mr. Davies gave me a short nod before going back into his own apartment. They all heard Isabel's raised voice. They came out here expecting a domestic dispute. What they got was something much more powerful. It was a public airing of the truth. A truth spoken so loudly it could never be taken back or denied. Leo and I were left alone in our kitchen, with $180 worth of catering going cold on the dining room table. "You planned this," Leo finally said, his voice empty. "You wanted this to happen." I just looked at him. I really saw the man I married 6 years ago. The man I had defended and financed and built my entire world around. And this was the man who had convinced himself that I was the problem. "I only told the truth. That's it. This entire mess is your own doing." "My mother-in-law was horrified, Fiad," he said, as if I wasn't even in the room. "She saw the figures in her own office, and now the whole family is keen to know." I finished his thought. "Yes, they will. They'll know the secret you've been hiding for 5 years. They'll know who really funded your career as a novelist." His face became a blotchy, furious red. "This is crazy. You're trying to make me look like what?" I interrupted. "The man who earned $52,000 in 5 years while I made $410,000. The husband who insisted on separate bank accounts while I paid for our entire life. The man who called his wife a shopaholic while she covered every single bill we had. He was silent. "The financial records don't lie, Leo," I said, my voice strong and even. "Your mother knows it. She's a retired CPA. She built her whole career helping clients untangle this exact kind of financial deception. It's financial abuse disguised as a partnership, and she just saw it first with her own son." "Don't use that term," Leo snapped. "It wasn't abuse. I wasn't trying to warrant you." I shot back. "You called my architectural firm a cute little side project. You said I had to be more careful with money. Just last week, you claimed you were tired of financially supporting us." I pointed to the pile of invoices on the island. "Every insult was a confession, Leo. Every single time you put down my business, it was about your own insecurity." He looked at the bank statements as if they were in a foreign language. "So, what's next?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I thought about the new project proposals waiting on my desk. "Now, you pay your half of the rent on the first. You buy your own groceries, you cook your own meals, you manage your own life. You finally learn how to be a real partner instead of a dependent." "And what about us?" His voice was so small it almost vanished. I looked at him, slumped in his mother's designer armchair. The artist I had enabled for 5 years. The man who couldn't even make his own car payment. "I don't know," I said. "I honestly have no idea. But I know one thing for sure: I am done being your financial safety net. I am done being your sponsor. I am done bankrolling this artistic delusion while my own successful company is dismissed as a hobby." Leo's phone buzzed, then buzzed again. A series of texts lit up his screen. He grabbed it, his eyes scanning the words, and all the colour washed out of his face. "What's wrong?" I asked. "It's my mother," he said, his voice cracking. He held the phone out to me. It had to be a single brutal message from Isabel. I saw how she'd stormed out of here earlier, her face like a storm cloud, saying nothing. "What did she say?" I asked, suddenly needing to know. Leo just shook his head, looking like he was about to be sick. He mumbled, "She's disgusted with me. She said, I will become a classic narcissist." He couldn't even finish the thought. He just pushed the into my hands. I read the text from Isabel. "I've spent my career teaching women how to leave financially abusive men, and you have made a mockery of my life's work. You used her, Leo. You called it a marriage when you were a leech. I don't recognize the man you have become." Then a new text popped up, from Jenna, our neighbour and Isabel's friend. Isabel just called me, crying. "Nina, I am so sorry. We never knew. Leo told my husband, Mike, your firm was failing and he was carrying you both. He said you were irresponsible with money. My God, we bought it." I saw another forwarded message from a friend down the hall. "He's the exact type of man his CPA mother always warned her clients about. The irony is just off the charts." Jenna's text was painfully clear. "Nina, if you see this, we finally understand. We should have asked questions sooner." I showed the phone to Leo. He looked nauseous, his mother told her. "Now everyone knows everything." "Yes," I said. "They know the truth. This is what happens when you build your life on someone else's work. Eventually, the entire structure collapses." He stared at me, completely lost. "Who are you?" "I'm the woman who is done being your silent backer," I told him. "The woman who remembered her architectural designs are worth millions. The one who got fed up with being called a financial drain by the man whose lifestyle she was paying for." I walked straight past him and out the door. "Where are you going?" he shouted after me. "To my studio," I said, "to my drafting board, to actually do my job, to be in my own world without needing to manage your fragile ego." "This isn't finished," he threatened, but his voice was weak. "No," I said, "it's not, but the rules have changed completely, and we are never, ever going back to how things were." I drove across Chicago to my architectural firm. Hours later, I heard Leo arrive back at our loft above the studio. I heard the fear in his voice on the phone, likely calling his mother, who I was willing to bet was not answering. I heard him pacing, opening the empty refrigerator over and over. Outside, the city lights came on, and our friends were definitely starting to talk. All about Eleanor S.'s public takedown. about the lie she'd finally torn open for everyone to witness. I was at my desk, looking over the blueprints for the new waterfront project. Tomorrow, Ethan would need to figure out his share of the mortgage he never even thought about. He'd have to buy food and learn how to use a stove. He'd have to answer to our friends, who all knew he was a fraud. But tonight, alone in my quiet studio, I felt something strange. Not joy, not even revenge, just the simple calm of a long lie finally ending. The silence in our Boston loft felt different, not peaceful, just hollow, like a building stripped to its frame, where you can finally see all the cracks in the foundation. I was awake for hours, just watching the ceiling, listening to Ethan shuffling around downstairs. I heard the rustle of takeout containers, the cheap snap of a plastic fork, the fridge door opening and closing. Then, silence. Sometime after midnight, the floorboards groaned outside my door. He stopped. Just stood there. I held my breath, waiting. Was he coming to beg for forgiveness? To scream at me? To somehow blame me for his own mother humiliating him? But the footsteps moved on, down the hall to the guest room. The door clicked shut. I let out my breath, rolled over, and clutched the duvet. My bed. In my room. For the first time in forever, I didn't feel like I was sharing my bed with a con artist. Monday morning was grey and drizzling. I was up before sunrise, making just 1 cup of coffee, getting ready in my bathroom without having to be quiet for Ethan. He was in the guest room, a separate person, living a separate life. I left for my architecture firm at the usual time. Maya was by the gate at the end of our drive. She tried to look casual, but she was obviously waiting for me. When I pulled over, her expression was a mess of emotions. Pity, maybe, and a whole lot of morbid curiosity. "Olivia?" She started, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you have a minute?" I put the car in park, but kept the engine on. Sure, she shot a look back at our condo, then met my eyes. "What Eleanor said about you paying for his whole life, is any of that true?" I could have made it easy for her. Said it was just a messy family argument, that his mom was being dramatic. But instead, I just told her the raw, simple truth. Every single word she said was true. My sigh seemed to physically shrink. For how long? The last 5 years. She made this little noise, half gasp, half curse. "Ben and I had no idea," she whispered. You two always seemed so successful, so perfect." That was the problem, I told her. I made it all seem so easy, so no one ever bothered to ask if I was okay. Maya nodded, finally getting it. She's a financial advisor. She gets it. She knows about hidden ledgers and secrets. "If you need anything," she said, squeezing my arm. "I'm serious. Anything at all. Ben and I are here for you. We see you." That line echoed in my head all day. "We see you," as if I'd been a ghost for years. Back at the studio, I dove into the new tower proposal with a focus I hadn't had in ages. Client calls, sourcing materials, crunching the numbers. The work was hard, it was rewarding, and it was 100% mine. At my firm, nobody questioned my professional judgment. No one second-guessed my decisions. No one would dream of taking credit for my designs. My assistant buzzed me around 3 o'clock. "Olivia, there's a personal call on line 2 for you. It's Eleanor Vance. She says it's urgent." I picked up the phone, a little confused. "Eleanor, it's Olivia." Her voice was firm, but I could hear a slight tremor underneath. "I needed to tell you this myself, before you heard it from someone else. I just waited." "I've told Ethan I am cutting him off completely," she said. "I am liquidating the trust fund I set up for him. I am reporting my own failure as a parent." I leaned back in my chair, stunned. Eleanor was the picture of control and family pride. For her to admit this was unthinkable. "That's a huge decision, Eleanor," I managed to say. "It's the only one," she shot back. "I'm 65 years old. My whole life has been about recognizing character, about teaching my children to avoid the kind of lazy deception Ethan perfected. And I let him do it. I let it continue because you were so damn competent." Her voice started to crack. "I used your strength as an excuse to ignore his weakness," she said. "I praised you for holding it all together, instead of asking why you were the only one holding anything. We were both quiet, connected by a phone line that stretched across the city of Boston. Can I ask you something difficult? Eleanor finally said, "and I need you to be honest. Do you believe you and Ethan can fix this, or is your marriage actually over?" It was the question I'd been avoiding for days. "I honestly have no idea," I told her. "I can't be that person again, but I don't know if Ethan can be someone new or if he's just trapped." "That's a fair answer," she said. "It is. I told him he has to earn back every bit of your trust. It's on him now to prove he's a grown man." "And what did he say to that?" Eleanor gave a short, harsh laugh. "He cried. Then he got angry. Then he cried again. He's a complete mess, Olivia, which is right where he needs to be." After we hung up, I just stared out at the city skyline. I wondered what Ethan was doing. Was he thinking about his actions or just his reputation? Did he understand what he had thrown away, or was he just mad that he got caught? Wednesday morning, my phone buzzed. A bank notification. Ethan had transferred $2,500. The memo read, "Mortgage payment, my half." I looked at the screen for a full minute. It was the first time in 6 years he'd paid his shares without me having to ask. Thursday, $180 for the power bill. Friday, $300 for food. Each transfer landed silently, with no texts or calls attached. It was just the money, his share of the debts, finally being paid. I finally broke down and checked his social media. He hadn't posted anything since his parents' anniversary dinner on Saturday. 3 days of silence for a guy who posts about his fintech insights was an eternity. His last post was some complex chart about market trends, but all the comments were gone. Whatever backlash happened after the dinner, he'd deleted every single angry reply. His follower count had cratered, down from over 100,000 to just 70. His fans were abandoning the startup genius, now that they knew his funding was my salary. That evening, I came home to a spotless apartment and a note on the counter in Ethan's neat handwriting. "Cancelled the premium data subscription. I'll use free sources. That's $500 a month, not $2,000. I'm selling the ergonomic desk chair online. Our first couples therapy session is scheduled for Tuesday at 5 p.m. We'll both need to leave work a little early. Signed, E." There was no grand emotional apology, no excuses, just facts, just cold, hard action. I read that note 3 times, trying to find the trick, the angle, the manipulation. There wasn't one. Just a man listing what he'd done, taking control of his finances, and admitting they required help. It was the most mature thing he had done in our entire relationship. I folded the paper and went to my study. I opened the drawer with the hard drive, holding all our financial records. The proof of a 6-year marriage that was a total lie. I placed the therapy confirmation beside it. Proof of Ethan finally accepting reality. And maybe, just maybe, the first real step he'd ever taken toward being a partner. That night, I made dinner for myself. A perfectly seared filet mignon with roasted asparagus. I used our best wedding china. I sat alone at our giant dining room table, reading a book propped up against the salt shaker. I was about halfway done when Ethan got home. I heard the key in the lock, then his footsteps halting as he saw me sitting there. "Wow, that smells amazing," he said, his voice quiet and unsure. I didn't even look up from my book. "There's another steak in the fridge if you want to cook it." He was just silent. Then he said, "I wouldn't have a clue where to begin." "There are about 1 million videos on the internet," I said, as I turned the page. "Or there's a cooking class at the rec center on Tuesday nights." More silence. I heard the refrigerator door open and close. The sound of him looking for something, anything, to eat. The microwave beeped as he heated up some leftover Thai food from a night I had also eaten by myself. He sat down at the other end of the long table. We ate without a word, him scrolling on his phone, me reading my novel. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't calm. It wasn't even a fight. It was just 2 strangers in a room, finally done pretending to be a happily married couple. "I sent the money for the mortgage," Ethan said into the quiet. "I saw. Thank you. It's more than I thought it was." I kept my eyes on my book. "I know, honestly, I have no idea how you did all this. The mortgage, the bills, keeping this place from falling apart, all of it, all while you were launching your own architecture firm. I finally looked up at him. His face was pale and thin. The stress was clearly getting to him, or maybe it was just the effort of having to remember to eat. "I did it," I said flatly, "because someone had to. Because it was clear you were never going to step up and help." He flinched, but he didn't argue. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know that's not enough. I know sorry doesn't fix 6 years of..." He paused, searching for the words. "Of me taking everything, of acting like a spoiled child, of calling you materialistic while you paid for my entire life." I closed my book. "You're right, sorry isn't even close to enough. But it's a start." "So what do I do?" he asked. "How can I fix any of this?" I just stared at the man I married, who now felt like a total stranger. This person who was possibly finally waking up from the fantasy he'd built. "You become a partner," I said. "You learn how to cook dinner, how to run a dishwasher, and how to manage your own damn calendar. You stop expecting me to be your mother and start acting like my husband. You have to prove, with action, not words, that you can give as much as you take. And if I do that, then we'll see," I told him. "But Mark, my life isn't on pause, waiting for you to grow up. I am moving forward now. If you want to be part of that, you have to earn it. Every single day." He just nodded, looking so smaller than I'd ever seen him before. Good, I thought. Let him feel what it's like to have the ground disappear from under him. Let him finally understand how it feels to be an afterthought for 6 years. Mark finished his microwaved pasta in total silence. He put his fork down and looked at me, his expression completely blank. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Like, really talk?" "We are talking," I said, not looking up from my book. "No, I mean," he hesitated, then tried again. "Can we please schedule a time to actually work through all this?" I slipped the bookmark into my novel and closed it. "When? Now? Or some other time? Whenever works for you." The fact he even asked about my schedule felt like a first step. "Tomorrow," I said. "Saturday afternoon, after I get back from the site visit." He nodded, looking relieved I wasn't just walking out the door. The next morning, I went for a long run along the lakefront. I passed Mrs. Rossi's townhouse, and she gave me a warm smile from her flower boxes. I ran by the Goldbergs, who offered a quiet, knowing nod. Even old Mr. Henderson from the corner said, "Morning, Julia." Same neighbours who saw the late-night Ubers and the boxes from designer boutiques now saw me, not as friends but as witnesses. People who finally understood the real story. I got home feeling powerful, more like myself than I had in years. Mark was at the dining table, surrounded by papers. He looked awful hollowed out and exhausted, like he hadn't slept at all. He'd definitely lost weight. His usual sharp, confident energy was completely gone, now that he wasn't spending his days at client lunches he couldn't afford. "Coffee?" he asked, gesturing to the pot. I poured a mug and sat across from him, and then I just waited in silence. "I started trying to write an actual business plan," he began. His voice was thin and raspy. "My dad, well, he's forcing me to face some of the delusions I've had for a very long time." I sipped my coffee and said nothing. "He gave me this template," Mark continued. "Told me to track my daily activities and assign a monetary value to them based on what they contribute to the business." He pushed a folder across the table. I opened it and saw pages of frantic notes and scratched-out diagrams. "I could do it," Mark said, his voice cracking. "I could assign a real dollar value to my time, because almost none of it creates any actual value." I scanned his notes, seeing him try to justify hours spent at networking happy hours, on social media, on ideation sessions that produced nothing, on market research he never used. 4 hours a day on branding, he said. "That S just for me. It adds nothing to our lives but debt. 10 hours a week, curating my founder persona for a company with no product. Maybe 1 hour a week, if I'm being generous, doing anything you could call real work." He buried his head in his hands. "Everything else is you, Julia. The mortgage, the bills, the health insurance, all the real planning. It was always you." I closed the folder and slid it back to him. "I called you financially reckless," Mark said, his eyes red and puffy. "I actually made myself believe that your salary was our money, but my potential startup equity was only mine. that you spent too much on groceries while I was investing in our future." He let out a dry, broken laugh. "Your entire work wardrobe for the last 6 years cost less than my trip to that one tech conference in Miami. My investments, the money from our savings, was over $80,000 to build a ghost." "I know," I said softly. "I know you know, and that's the part I can get over." He shook his head slowly. "I am not the hero in this story. It was me. I was the entire risk, and I refused to see it until your dad called me and laid out the whole disaster in front of my face. We just sat there in the heavy silence. From the living room, the old grandfather clock chimed 10 o'clock. A normal Saturday morning sound. "So what exactly are you trying to say, Mark?" I finally asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe just that I am starting to understand. That I am trying. That I am," his voice broke, "that I am so incredibly sorry for everything. And I actually mean it this time." I met his gaze. This was the man who called me unambitious while I paid for his entire life. The man who was finally seeing the chaos he'd created. "Okay," I said, "I hear you. That evening my friend Chloe called. Brunch tomorrow? My treat. We need to talk." We met at a busy place in Lincoln Park. Chloe had a Bloody Mary waiting for me. "I'm just so relieved you finally see him for what he is," she said as I slid into the booth. I just looked at her. "You could have said something." "Oh, I've been biting my tongue for years, Julia," she said. "Watching you work yourself to death at the firm. Watching you make excuses for him every single time he maxed out another credit card. Then why didn't you?" She gave a short, bitter laugh. "I tried, a couple of times. Remember that weekend in Lake Geneva 3 years ago, when I said Mark acts like a trust fund baby without the trust fund? And I did. A fuzzy, horrible memory. A huge argument that ended with me not talking to her for a month. You told me I was just jealous," Chloe went on. "That building a company is brutal and he needed your support. That a good wife doesn't question her husband. You said I was being negative." The memory came rushing back. I'd told her she didn't understand the world of venture capital. "I dropped it," Chloe said, "because you didn't want to hear it. You had completely bought into this fantasy of being a power couple. You made his success your whole project." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "But Julia, your value was never tied to his potential. It was always about you. Brilliant, dedicated, loyal, and kind. You were the success story all along." Her voice got quiet. "He was the one terrified he would never be good enough, so he spent years making sure you felt like you were the one falling behind." That one sentence hit me like a physical blow, and I started to cry, right there in the crowded restaurant. The kind of messy, ugly sobs you can't control, the kind that makes strangers stare. Chloe moved into the booth next to me, wrapping a strong arm around my shoulders while I grieved for the life I thought I was building. "I feel like such a fool," I choked out. "You are not a fool," Chloe said, her voice fierce. "You were committed. You were loyal. You loved a man who took advantage of that loyalty. That is his failure, not yours." That afternoon, Mark's mother, Eleanor, texted me asking if I had time to meet. Just us. We met in a quiet hotel bar downtown, far from our usual neighborhoods. Eleanor looked wrecked. Her usual polished, perfect mask was gone. All I saw was a tired, sad woman. "I owe you a real apology," she said, after the waiter brought our drinks, "for always taking Mark's side." I didn't say a word, I just waited. When Mark was a little boy, Eleanor started. His father had an affair. A terrible public one. For almost a year, our lives were absolute hell. She swirled the condensation on her glass. "My own sister begged me to leave him, said I was a fool to stay, that he'd never really change. But I defended him. I fought for our marriage. I didn't speak to my sister for the entire year." Eleanor looked me right in the eye. "Mark's father and I, we did the work. He ended it. He begged me to forgive him. We actually became stronger. And I told myself that staying was the right thing to do." She took a long, shaky breath. "Watching you, I realize now I was just trying to force your life to fit my own story. I needed my son to be his father. I needed you to forgive him, just to prove that I was right all those years ago, and I completely ignored what was actually happening." What was the difference? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Between them, Eleanor's eyes turned hard as stone. His father made one horrible mistake, she said, and he was truly ashamed of what he had done. He spent the next 30 years proving he was a better man with his actions, not just his apologies. She held my gaze. Mark isn't sorry for what he did. He is sorry he got caught. He wasn't just making a mistake. He was living a lie, and he let you carry the weight of that lie for years. There's a world of difference between a moment of weakness and a pattern of deception. The anger I'd had for Eleanor just dissolved. What your father-in-law and I have now, she added, is a partnership built on a very painful truth. Her voice trembled. What you have with my son is a performance, and I am so deeply sorry that I chose to sit in the front row and applaud. I am so sorry I didn't protect you the way I always protected my son. Her hand rested gently on mine. I made excuses for his temper. I never questioned his work trips. I told you that you were being dramatic instead of asking why you were so miserable. I let you think you were crazy for suspicions that were entirely true. We were quiet for a moment. So what will you do now? Evelyn finally asked. I honestly don't know, I said. There's a baby on the way. That is my grandchild, Evelyn stated firmly. Whatever you decide to do, I am on your side now. Yours and the baby's, 100%. She was the last person I'd ever expected to be my ally, but she was the one I needed most. A mother who was finally choosing her daughter-in-law over her own son. That night, I stood in the unfinished nursery, just staring at the architectural plans. My phone buzzed. A message from Liam. I told her it's completely over. My first therapy session is booked for tomorrow. My doctor said we could try couples counselling down the line, if you're ever open to it. No pressure, I swear. I read his text 5 times. Finally I typed, I need some time. His reply was instant. Of course, take all you need. I'm doing this for me regardless. I set my phone down and just stared at the empty crib. This was the social circle where our private hell had become public entertainment, where Evelyn's switching sides sent shockwaves through the entire family. Things were definitely changing. Maybe his apology was genuine, but was genuine enough? I didn't make a quick decision. Weeks bled into months. Liam went to his therapy appointments. He came home right after work every single night. He traded his sports car for a sensible SUV, the kind of car a new father would own. That was huge for a man whose identity was tied to his success. He mentioned counselling a few more times. Each time, I just said I wasn't there yet, and he always dropped it. He never pressured me once. 6 months after I found out everything, 8 months pregnant, I woke up to the smell of pancakes. Not the kind from a box. These were made from scratch. I walked downstairs to see him at the stove, carefully flipping one. He was concentrated, like he was performing surgery. Sift the flour, whisk the eggs. Don't overmix. Let the batter rest. It was obvious he'd been doing his research. Morning, he said, keeping his eyes on the pan. Morning. He slid a perfect stack of them onto a plate and passed it to me. I took a bite. They were incredible. So light, so fluffy. The kind of food that shows someone is putting in the work. I've been taking a class at the Culinary Institute, Liam said, almost sheepishly. Just some basic skills. I figured I should know how to cook for our family. You know, roast a chicken, make a decent bone broth. I just kept eating the pancakes, nodding. I tried that beef stew recipe last weekend, he went on. The carrots were still a bit firm, but I was close. That's nice, I said. We ate in the quiet cat kitchen, feeling more like strangers sharing a house than a husband and wife. I sold the boat last week, Liam said suddenly. The money is going straight into a college savings account for the baby. I had to admit, that was a pretty significant gesture. I also resigned from the museum's board, he added, and the foundation. It opens up all my evenings. A dad should be home for bath time. It's as simple as that. He said it like it was an obvious fact. No performance, just a statement. We finished breakfast in a silence that was thick with all the words we weren't saying. Can we please talk? Liam asked. About what happens now? I nodded. Okay, we sat in the living room, on opposite ends of the sofa, with what felt like a canyon of space between us. I need to ask you something, he began. And I need you to be brutally honest, no matter what the answer is. I held my breath. Is there any hope for us? Or do I tell my lawyer to start drawing up the divorce papers? It was the question I had been avoiding for months. I don't know, I said, and it was the honest truth. Liam nodded, like he'd expected that answer. My therapist says the affair was about my own deep-seated insecurity, he said softly. That I built my whole personality on being the successful architect, the guy with the perfect life, instead of just trying to be a good man. He stared down at his hands. She said I was using you as an accessory. Like if a woman as amazing as you chose me, then I must be worthy. But I wasn't. I was just sucking the life out of you. Yes, I said. It was time for nothing but the truth. You weren't just cheating on me. You were helping me design a nursery for our child while lying to my face, and you had the audacity to call me paranoid. His voice started to break. I made you doubt your own mind when you were the only rational person in my life. And I have no idea how to fix that, Maya. I can't undo the... He stopped, inhaling sharply. Abuse! My therapist called it emotional abuse. I hate that word, but it's true. I stayed silent, letting that ugly reality hang in the air. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he said, finally meeting my gaze. I'm asking what you need to be happy. And if that's a divorce, I'll sign everything. No fight. I will just go. You deserve to be the one who makes the call. I looked at him. This was the man who'd called my entire career a nice little hobby. The man who was possibly, just possibly, changing into someone else. I need time, I told him. Real time. Not just a few months. I need at least a year. I need to know this isn't just you trying to avoid a messy settlement. Liam just nodded. Okay. I need to see you be partner in this house, hold down your job, and manage your schedule without me acting as your assistant. Okay. You have to continue individual therapy. And we have to find a marriage counselor, a real one, who specializes in this kind of betrayal, not one who just gives us worksheets. I'll start looking tomorrow, Liam promised. I'll find someone who handles this kind of devastation. I took a long breath. And you have to accept that if we survive this, we are never going back to how things were. I will no longer be your social planner. I will no longer manage your life while you get all the accolades. And you will never again call me ungrateful when my design work paid our mortgage before your firm ever took off. I understand, Liam said, his voice quiet. I don't want to go back. The man I was. He struggled for the right words. He was a monster, so arrogant, so cruel. We sat in a heavy silence for what felt like an eternity. Can I ask one thing? Liam finally said, breaking the tension. What? Why are you even considering this? After all of it, why didn't you just serve me with divorce papers that first day? I'd asked myself that exact question 1,000 times. Because I need to see if a person can actually change, I said at last. Not just apologize, not just behave for a while until the crisis is over, but actually, fundamentally, become someone new. I looked him directly in the eyes. And because the man I married 7 years ago, before all the money and the ego and this disaster that man was worth fighting for, I have to know if he's still in there somewhere. Tears filled Liam's eyes. I'm trying to find him again too, he whispered. That morning, 6 months and 2 weeks after that horrible day, Evelyn came over for brunch. But this time, it was a completely different world. Liam was the one in the kitchen, cooking everything. Just some elevated scrambled eggs and crispy potatoes. It wasn't fancy, but it smelled incredible. And he was totally focused on it. Evelyn arrived right at noon. She'd left her corporate CEO persona at the office. She was wearing jeans and a nice sweater with a genuine smile on her face. Something smells wonderful, she said, hugging me first. Then she turned and gave Liam a hug. It's just eggs, he said. I tried a trick I saw online. Hopefully they're not made of rubber. The 3 of us set the patio table together. Evelyn folded napkins, I put out the silverware, and Liam carried out the food. The complete reversal of our old dynamic was almost startling. We sat down, and Liam's eggs were perfect. Not just fine, but really, really good. The kind of cooking that comes from someone who is actually paying attention. Then Evelyn raised her glass of orange juice. A toast, Evelyn said, looking between me and Liam. To hard truths, to new beginnings, and to the incredibly difficult work of becoming the people we are supposed to be. Our glasses clinked. I am so proud of you, Liam, she said, her eyes getting misty. Not for your buildings or your awards, but for this. For facing the wreckage you created and trying to clean it up. That's real strength. Liam's throat was tight. Thanks, Mom. Then Evelyn turned to me. And, Maya, thank you. For demanding respect, for refusing to be silenced, and for showing my son what true partnership actually means. When brunch was over, Liam started clearing the plates. I've got it, he insisted when I stood to help. No, you cooked, I said. Perhaps, he admitted. But for 10 years, you held it all together while I chased a vision. Now it's my turn. Diana and I sat on the patio while Ethan cleaned up inside. We heard the clinking of plates, the sound of him actually learning the layout of his own kitchen. So, Diana asked softly, how is he really? He's trying, I answered, and I meant it. This isn't an overnight fix, but he's trying. He's covering his own expenses. He got a new job. He's in therapy. He's learning to be a husband. What about you? It took me a beat to reply. I'm okay, I said. I still don't know if this marriage has a future, but here's what's different. I'll be fine no matter what happens. That's the biggest change now. A year ago, I would have been destroyed if he left. Now, I know I can make it alone, so if I stay, it's my choice, not my cage. Diana squeezed my hand hard. That's the strongest I've ever heard you sound. Later, after she left, I found myself in the doorway of his study, the room where our world imploded, where a single pop-up message on a laptop turned our private failure into a family scandal. Ethan came up behind me, leaving a careful space between us. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not walking away that day. For giving me a chance to be someone you could be proud of. I turned to face him. Don't thank me. We're not fixed, Ethan. We may never be. This could still end with lawyers. I know, he replied. But if it does end, it will be your call for your own well-being. Not because I was too arrogant to see what I was losing. We stood there in silence. The study where his mother had seen that message felt different now. It wasn't a crime scene anymore. Just a room where we were trying to find our way. Some marriages have a clean break. Ours was a slow, painful reconstruction, one brutal conversation at a time. But that sound, that awful notification ping, that's when all the lies stopped. The moment his own mother saw the man she'd actually raised. And in our wealthy Seattle community, where image is everything, the story of what Diana saw became a quiet legend. It showed that the truth, when it finally surfaces, can shatter more than just illusions. But in the wreckage, sometimes you can build something stronger. If this story about betrayal and the difficult road toward healing resonated with you, please hit that thumbs up. For me, the most shocking part was Diana seeing that message pop up on the screen. What moment stood out most to you? Share your opinion in the comments. And for more complex relationship stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a thing.